Welcome to a demo of LegalServer. We're going to start here today on an example of a home page in LegalServer where every user is directed each time they log into the system. Mostly to point out that this home page is completely customizable. So you would get to decide what information is here handy on your user dashboard, what is available to your users. Keep in mind that you can have as many different versions of this homepage as you'd like. So you could have a different version for your supervisors, for general staff, volunteers, or interns, or any other types of users that are logging into your site. Those can be customized to those user types so that they're showing the information relevant to the type of work that person will be doing in the system. On my homepage, you'll notice I have some handy links at the top so you can make available resources and things for your users. And then most of the homepage is typically specific to me as the logged in user. So you'll notice I have here a list of outstanding tasks that I have to complete on, different cases and things that I'm assigned to in the system. I might have some upcoming events on my calendar here. Of course, my assignments, any cases that I am currently assigned to in the system. And you can also enable some quick actions from this list right here. So you can add a quick case note or next task or next court date without actually having to navigate into each of those specific records just right here from our dashboard. And then again, other things relevant to my user type. So if I am someone who will be entering new cases into the system, I might have a list of incomplete intakes that I've started but have not finished yet. One more thing to point out on the home page, especially popular with supervisor type home pages, is what we call embedded reports. So anything that you build as a report here in LegalServer can also be displayed like this throughout the site. So here I have a quick pie chart of all of our open cases by primary advocate, so I can get a look at everybody's workload. And then I also have a quick pie chart of our open cases by legal problem code. But again, anything that you could build as a report here in LegalServer can also be displayed so we can quickly see that information here on our dashboard. Next up, we're going to take a look at how we can create some new cases here in LegalServer. And the first thing to talk a little bit about is the optional pre-screen process. So you can use this if you need to collect very initial basic information, typically to do a pre-eligibility check for an applicant. So if you want to, you can start here. You can collect, again, very basic information, things like their name and date of birth to do a conflict check if you need to. You could do a really quick percentage of poverty calculation here as well. Of course, check things like the legal problem code or, county, where is this case to see if they're eligible. And again, this is completely customizable to any of that information that you would need to check for pre-eligibility. So you would set this up, of course, with that data. And then at the end of the pre-screen, you get to decide what happens next with this record. So, of course, if we found something that meant that this person is not eligible for services, maybe they have a conflict or something like that, you're able to just reject that pre-screen. You can also optionally mark a referral as you reject it as well if you're going to be referring to another organization for help. If we don't find any conflicts or other, eligibility issues showing here, you can escalate this pre-screen to your intake process. So basically keep on the path of creating a case in the system. So we can go ahead and escalate to any intake process that you've built in the site here. And then you also, of course, have the option to just leave these pending. So if you're not quite sure if this is going to move forward as a case or not, we can leave it pending and also have the option to set up things like callback so we can record how many times we've tried to call this person to get more information or to move forward. So that's our pre-screen process. Again, optional. It's there if you need it. And also keep in mind you could have multiple pre-screen processes. So if you do have different eligibility requirements for different programs or case types or whatever that breakdown might be, again, you can have as many different versions of that as needed. So we're going to go ahead and now take a peek at the actual intake process. So again, how we can create cases here in LegalServer. And just like I mentioned with a pre-screen, you can have as many different versions of that intake process as needed, again, for your data collection needs. So you'll notice I have quite a few different example type intakes built on this site. Again, you'd get to decide how many that you might need. And oftentimes we just have one intake process because you will have the option to build in some logic throughout really any process here in LegalServer. So you can build in logic, and we'll see some examples of this to say if it's a certain type of case, we need to ask these extra 5 questions. Or if we're collecting demographic information and I indicate that the client has a disability, we might get a new question that pops up to enter the nature of disability. And we never would have seen that extra question if we said no to the original one. So keep in mind again that you can build in that logic to make sure you're collecting the right data along the way. We're going to go ahead and pop into my intake, my example intake, called Simple Intake, as the name suggests. This one's pretty short and sweet. I've just got 4 steps here that we've got to walk through to create a case. But again, keep in mind this would be customizable. So you would get to decide how many steps are in your intake, the order of those steps, and of course, what appears on each page. That will also include things like what information is defaulted for us. You'll notice my intake date defaults to today's date. Should we be able to edit that? Like you'll notice my intake program is defaulted and read only. And also, of course, what should be required information throughout, which you'll see that little marker next to some of my fields here. Before we start to fill out this intake, I do also want to show you a quick example of how easy it is to make changes throughout the site. And keep in mind, not every user would be able to make this type of change, just whoever you designate as your administrators. So every user that logs into LegalServer is assigned a user role, and that will determine their access throughout the system, what they have permission to see and do. An administrator is the top level of user role. So those users are going to be able to see and do the most in the site, including making site-wide configuration changes. So, as an administrator, if I were looking at this form and I saw that our language field here is currently optional, but maybe I'd like it to be required. I want to make sure that we always capture a language for every applicant that we do an intake for. So, to make that change, all I would have to do is click Edit right at the top of this form. Again, that's only going to show up for your administrators. Scroll down until I see the field that I want to update, which is our language field here. Open up that element and check that required box. It's as easy as that. You'll also notice while we're here, I could relabel that field. So the field itself is actually just called language, but we've labeled it as primary language. We can update that if we need to. We could set a default value. So if most of our applicants are English speaking, we can go ahead and just default that. So I've got lots of options for each field that is included on a form here. You'll also notice that I'm able to add entirely new things to this form while I'm here. I can add new headers, new instruction boxes, new fields to capture more data. So let's say that we also want to ask about a second language. We just search, find that field, add it to our form, and then drag it up wherever I want it to live. And again, I could open it up to mark it required, set a default, etc. Once we have made our changes, we'll go ahead and hit continue. And it's going to bring us right back to the front end of that form so that we can see those changes, make sure they look good, and if not, go back and make some more edits. Also important to note is that administrators will have full ability to create new custom fields in your site. So if you ever have a data point that you need to collect and we don't have a field for it already, you're going to be able to build it. All different types, your own custom drop downs, yes, no fields, text fields, number fields, etc. And then, of course, place that new field on your intake or your closing form or wherever you want to collect that data and add it to any reports that you might need it on as well. Lastly, also keep in mind that administrators will have full control over all of the drop-down lists of values that you see throughout the site today. So any field that has values to pick from, like language here, or gender, or race, or problem code, you're going to be able to decide what those values should be in your site. And you can also update those values, add new ones, remove them, change the wording whenever you might need to. So let's go ahead and fill out our required fields for our intake here. We do have an example of that logic built on language as well. So you'll notice if I change it from our default, which is English, to any other language, we're going to get an extra field that pops up to ask if we need an interpreter. So again, just an example, really simple example of that logic that you can build in here. Of course, up to you on what types of contact information you're collecting and requiring here, phone numbers, addresses, email address, etc. And then my second step, and pretty typical if you need to do one, is going to be our automatic conflict check results. So here I'm able to see anyone in the database connected to one of our existing cases who's a possible match for our applicant based on name, date of birth, social if we collect it, and it will also check for any matching phone numbers. You'll see that score. So why did this person appear as a possible match with the strongest matches up at the top? You also do get a link to each of these case records. So if you want to see more information than you get in this list view to make your determination, is this possibly a conflict or maybe a duplicate? Again, you can view that whole case record here as well. And we also have a radio button to indicate that it is the same person, but a new legal issue. So if we are doing the intake for this person for their foreclosure case, and I recognize this is the same person. I say, hey, do you also have a case for us for your collections case? And they say, yep, that's me. We can go ahead and attach our new intake, our new case that we're creating to that existing client record. Scrolling down, we're also able to add and search on additional names for our applicant, like an alias or a maiden name. You can run that search as many times as you need to. And you could also add and search on any non-adverse parties, so family members or, other folks who are non-adverse to the case. Then we make our determinations. Did we find any conflicts or duplicates? Of course, you can also set up some logic based on these values. So if we do find a conflict, do we want to automate what happens next? Should it send someone an email to review? Should it automatically send us to a page to reject this record? Or maybe it should send us to a page where we can restrict some people from the case if we have just, some people with a conflict. So again, you would get to decide if there should be some logic there. At the bottom, I have my intake notes. Most groups like to have this at the bottom of each step so that along the way, I can just add any information I have that doesn't fit into the context of the fields on that page, and then keep adding to it, and it becomes one big case note in the end. And of course, you've got some formatting options at the top. So you can do things like bolding and underlining and bullet points, clickable hyperlinks. All of that is possible here in your notes. And then once I hit continue here, we're going to get to our next step, which in my simple intake is going to be where we select our legal problem code and possibly have some extra questions based on that selection. I'm using all three levels, so category code and special code. You'll get to decide if you'd like to do that. And of course, you also get to determine what values you have in each of those drop downs and how they're connected to each other. But you'll notice if I say this is a consumer type case, I'm going to get just my consumer linked problem codes and any special problem codes that match that one I've selected. You'll also notice when I said this was a bankruptcy case, I got two extra questions that popped up here to answer. If I go back and say this is actually a housing case, let's say it's just a 69 other housing, we get some different questions to answer that are, of course, more housing related. So again, just an example of that logic. You can have different questions based on problem code. You can have even more questions based on special legal problem code if you're drilling down into that. You can also have multiple levels of logic built here. So keep in mind that if you wanted to ask more questions or different questions, if they said yes to this one, you could set that up. Or for example, if I say my housing type is apartment, maybe we get a new question that asks how many units are in my building. So again, you can really build in that logic to collect any data that you need here. Once we hit continue, we are going to get to my final step of the intake here. Keeping in mind, of course, that your intake could collect much more or very different information than this one. So, of course, could include things like financial information collection and eligibility checking, adverse party information collection, and conflict checking. So, all of that, of course, can be included if needed. But here at the end of the intake, we get to decide what to do with this record, just like we saw at the end of that pre-screen process. So we, of course, can go ahead and just accept our case, open it up. We could reject it if for some reason we're not going to move forward. And keep in mind, you could have rejected it at any step if you're, finding a conflict or eligibility issue along the way. You don't have to keep collecting data. You can also leave it pending and really just make that decision later. And you can also enable some options like accept and close, typically for brief advice cases, or set pending and schedule an appointment on the calendar or schedule into a clinic. So you can enable some different options here that are relevant to your workflows. We'll just go ahead and say we're going to accept our case right away here. We can set a level of service, which again, you get to set up those values for what makes sense for your cases. But essentially, this one is used to get a better peek at workloads. How much work is this particular type of case going to take? And then we have our case status. This one is more so tracking where this case is in your internal life cycle. So yes, it's open, but is it just working? Is it awaiting placement with someone? Is it ready to close? And this will keep a history for you so you'll know when and how this case has moved through that life cycle. And you can also do overall site reporting, things like what's our average number of days between ready to closed and actually closed, etc. We then have, of course, our basics, our date open defaults to today, but I do have my handy date picker if I need to change that. Accepted by will be you, the logged in user. We can have our office and program default if we want them to. And then I do have to set someone as our primary assignment of the case. So every case has to be assigned to at least one person so that it doesn't get lost in the system. It's always on at least one person's homepage. And then, of course, you can make as many additional assignments as you need to, both internal and external to, pro bono volunteers or other types of outside folks. We've got our funding code selection here as well, and a reference to our advanced grant filters. So this is completely optional, but if you'd like to, when you're setting up grants here in LegalServer, you can set some filters or parameters on those grants. So for instance, I've said that my general grant here can only be used on cases where the problem code is bankruptcy or collections. So I, of course, made this a housing case. I can't select that grant. But I can select the building division grant because my case is not a family law case. That's the restriction here. So any grant can have as many filters as you'd like to set up. They can be very complex logic. So you can say, it shouldn't be used if it's this problem code or, the client is a veteran or whatever kind of combination of data points that are needed here. Now, every time I make an assignment here in LegalServer, so our primary assignment that we're making here, and then any additional assignments I decide to make later, I have the option to write a note about it and to send that note off via email. So typically what this is used for is I would write a note to whoever I'm assigning, so to Nora here. I would write her a note about, why I've assigned her to this case or some details about the case or whatever information I'd like to share with her. And then in the recipient's box, I would just start to type in her name, and she would pop up, if she were current, in the system with whatever email address is in her user account. So I don't have to remember what her email address is. I just have to know her name or look above to see her name, and I'm going to be able to send off that email. Keep in mind, you can email as many people as you'd like from here, so I can also include whoever I'm assigning as co-counsel or our supervisor, or I could just type in Nora's Gmail address there manually as well. Scrolling down, I've got my intake notes. We see that note I entered before. I can add to it, of course. And once we hit continue, we are officially done with our intake and we have created a case here in our system. So again, you'll want to think of this case profile we're seeing here as an example of what a case can look like in LegalServer because it is also very customizable. So you would get to decide for your case profile what information we're showing in this top section or snapshot here. You also get to decide not only what information shows up here, but how it's all organized. So when I built this profile, I got to decide these are, the 15 or so fields that should show up in this first column. Then we want a new column with this header and these, 6 fields, and so on. So you'll get to decide exactly what this looks like, how it's all organized, and again, the data that shows up that's important for users to see right at the top of your case here. You keep in mind, you can also do some cool things up in this snapshot, like highlight certain values for certain fields. So let's say, as an example, that during our intake process, we ask if the client is a victim of domestic violence. And if they say yes, that is really important information that every user should see when they come to a case. So we make sure, we're communicating with the client safely and things like that. So I could set up my snapshot to show that field highlighted if it is yes. If they said no, there's no domestic violence, or we just didn't answer that question, we could have it show but not highlighted, or we could even hide it entirely. We could say, if it's no, we don't need to know that up at the top here, so just hide it from us. And then also, lastly, to add, you can also make fields editable right from here. So anything that you want to easily be able to click and edit right from the top of your profile, again, you can configure that way as well. As I scroll down my profile, you'll notice that we have more information here. And this is typically built out as rows of tabs. I just have one row of tabs. My profile is relatively simple, but you can have as many rows as needed. So depending on, what you're collecting, how much data you're collecting on cases, and how many case management items you're using, like notes and time slips and litigation records, again, you can have as many of those rows of tabs as needed. So it kind of comes back to what I was just saying about how you get to decide what data shows up here, but also how it's all organized. So I could have just 3 tabs on my top row and then break out to another row for the next 3 and then the next 2. Or, however, again, it makes sense for me to have this profile all organized. Another important thing to note is that you can have multiple different case profile views, just like we talked about with the home page earlier. So I can have different views based on the type of case. That's actually the example that we're seeing here right now. I said that this was a housing case. That's the legal problem code that we selected. So my site is set up to automatically load us into our special housing case profile. And I built this case profile so that I could have some housing specific information right here on the profile. Then of course I wouldn't, probably want to see if I were looking at a adoption case or an immigration case. So any of that case specific information that you want to show here on the profile, again, you can build those separate profiles to do so. And just like I said, default that based on the legal problem code selected. So if I would have said this was an immigration case, it would have loaded me into our immigration profile. Keep in mind, you can also build out profiles and default those views based on the type of person who is logged in viewing the case. So let's say that we've decided to allow our volunteers to log into LegalServer. And of course, we have set them up with a special user role that has limited access. They can see and do a lot less than our internal staff can. One of the things that you could do to make sure that happens is you could set up a volunteer view of your case profile and set that up for that user role to default to. So if I log in as a volunteer, I click on one of the cases I'm assigned to, it's going to load with the volunteer profile. And it would likely be, a pared down profile from what your staff would see. So again, you can have as many different profile views built as needed and can default them based on case type and or type of user. The last general thing to mention here on our case profile is our actions menu at the top. This is where you're going to build out all of the various actions that you should be able to take with a case. So all of your case management actions, essentially. Of course, we have things like adding case notes and documents and time if you need to enter time into the system, editing case information, assigning more people to the case, of course, eventually closing the case. But also keep in mind that you can build in completely custom processes here for any data collection that you need to do after the initial intake stage, but before closing out the case. So I have a silly example that we built during a training here of adding some season information, but we can click into that to see an example. So here we have a bunch of custom fields and probably some logic as well. So if I say yes, I have a favorite season, we get our drop down of what is your favorite season. If I say no, we don't have to answer that question. So again, just an example of a custom data collection process here for an existing case record. Also important to note is that every one of these actions items has their own permissions tied to them. So you really will get to decide who can do what with your case records. So we could decide, for example, that everybody who can log in and access a case can add notes to it, even our volunteers. But maybe we've decided that only our supervisor team should be able to actually close cases. So if I'm logged in as any other user type, I don't even see the close case link in the list here. But if my supervisor logs in, clicks into the same case record, they would have that option. So again, you get to decide who can do what with your case records. Speaking of adding a case note, let's go ahead and do that together. So we'll choose our note type. You can also have that defaulted if you'd like. Subject, of course, is optional. Then we've got the body of the note. And again, all of our formatting options. Just like with the assignment note that we saw earlier, we can always send these off via email. And you can also have the option here to send them as a message, which is just the internal messaging here within LegalServer. So that, of course, I would see next time I log into the system. Then we have the option to upload a document along with my case note. And you can do multiple if needed. You could just drag and drop or keep uploading those. And you can also have the option to attach some time to the note as well. So if you're going to be entering time into the system, you have a really easy short time slip that you can enter right with your case note. Once we hit continue, we're going to be right back to the case. And of course, I can scroll down and see the new note that we've entered. I can also see the document that we've attached to that note. And of course, the original intake note that we entered. I can also head over to my Documents tab, see that document that we've uploaded right here in our regular folder structure. which keep in mind, you can build as many different folders and subfolders and whatever structure of folders that you need on each case. And you can also set up some auto-created folders. So if you'd have some folders you would typically want available on your case records, again, you could just have those auto-create at the intake stage. And then lastly, we also added some time there so we could see that time slip and the running total of time for this case so far. Couple more things to mention for notes and documents. One is that those can also be emailed into your case file. So we've already seen a couple of places where I can email things from LegalServer, but again, we can also email things to our case. So if I scroll back up, you'll see our case's email address in my snapshot here and an easy way to click and copy that. That is what we'll use to send things to this case. And every case will have that email address created when you create the case in the system. It works just like a regular email. I can send things to it. I can CC it. I can BCC it. I can forward a whole string to it. And the actual email itself, the body of the email, will come in as a case note right to your case notes list here. And any attachments will come in as documents. So it will look very similar to the one that we just entered. You'll see the email here, and again, any attached documents. Those will also, of course, end up in your folder structure. It will create a separate folder for those emailed documents, but of course, you can always move them around to whatever folder they should live in. Also, keep in mind that you can utilize document templates here in LegalServer. So if you have any standard letters or memos or things that you want to be able to generate from the system, you would build them in here once, tell LegalServer where you want to fill in specific data into that document. So the client's name should fill in here at the top. The legal problem code should fill in here. Any data that you want from that case record in that document. And then it would be available on this list for your users to download and automatically fill that case data into the document for them. You can do the same thing with emails. So you can also build email templates. So we could see an example of that pretty easily. And again, it's going to fill in that data for you. So apologies for my formatting, not the nicest formatting that we have on mine. But there we go. You can see again, it's filling in our client name and our problem code and open date and our primary name at the bottom. And of course, I can adjust whatever I need to and then go ahead and send that off via email. We do also want to point out that we have a full calendar here in LegalServer, which can be used to add events and tasks and deadlines both to case records and also just generally. So we can use this if we want to record things like staff meeting events or a task to build a new report here in LegalServer, things that wouldn't be case specific, but just specific to a user or users. If I go up to actions, we could add a new event to this case as an example. These pages are also customizable, so you would get to decide what are we recording about a case event. You can even build custom fields here if you need to. We'll just say there's a hearing for this case. Of course, we can put in other details like the location. The type that you select will determine the color that it shows up on the calendar here in LegalServer. So all of your hearings are the same color, all of your team meetings are the same color. And again, keep in mind, you get to decide what types are available to choose from. Of course, we can mark it active and private if we don't want other users to see the details. We can broadcast it to everybody if it's something like a staff meeting that should be on everyone's calendar. And of course, pick the day and time should this recur. Do we want to add anyone else to the event so they should see it on their calendar as well? You can add as many people as needed. And also, of course, can write a note, send that note off via email or message, just like we've seen. And you can also add a reminder to these. So if you want to set up a reminder or reminders, you can actually do multiple, as many as you want to. Um, that will automatically trigger and send either an email, a message, or we can also have a third option to send these as a text. And of course, you get to decide when should that reminder send out, what should the reminder say. You can build templates to use here as well. And then again, who to send it to and how we want to send it. And then we can save that event and of course view it on our calendar here. So you've got all of your traditional calendar views. We can see the day, the week, or the month, and of course toggle between day, week, and months as well. And any event on your calendar or deadline, like this one, that is tied to a case, if we hover over, we can see the details, we get our edit link, and I can also click back to that case. And of course, see all of the upcoming events for that case and also any incomplete tasks that we have here as well. The calendar and LegalServer here does have a one-way sync available. So you can set it up to sync to an outside calendar like an Outlook calendar or a Google calendar. And if you do that, any events that you add here in LegalServer can also be set to display on that outside calendar. So those were just some basics for case management. Of course, as we talked about, this would be very customizable to make sure that we have all of the data collection processes that you need, and of course, any case management actions that you need to have available for your workflows as well. I do want to talk a little bit about how to find things here in LegalServer. So we do have lots of options for searching. We have our search everything at the top, so that can search through all of the various records here at LegalServer, all of our case records, contacts, documents, etc. We also, of course, can search for things on a specific case profile. So, for instance, I could come to our case notes list. I've got a search box at the top there. So I might want to find, any notes that have the word accept in them, and that will do that search for me there. And you also have the option for essentially searching for things throughout the system by filtering. So I could also come to this case notes list and I could filter it by, let's say, just a certain type of note. I just want to see my intake notes, or I just want to see the notes that I created on this case. And you can also do that with the list views outside of a case profile. So for instance, I have this cases tab where I see all of my case records. And again, I can filter that list down. So if I'm looking for a specific set of cases, maybe things opened in a certain date range or certain legal problem code, maybe both of those things. And also, where a certain person is our primary assignment. Again, I can apply those filters and essentially use them as our search criteria. And then lastly, we're going to take a peek at this in just a bit, but just to mention for now, reports can always be used for searching for things as well. Another module that I'd like to take a quick peek at together is our outreach module. This is where you can keep any record that doesn't fit into the context of a case. So for some organizations, this is things like clinics that don't need specific scheduling, or outreach events, community events, trainings, CLE trainings that you might host or be part of. So any of those types of records that you want to capture here in LegalServer can be created as an outreach. Just like with intakes, you can have as many different outreach create processes as needed. So I just have one on my site here, but you might have in your actions menu, add new outreach, add new training assistance record, add new advocacy record, add new clinic. Again, just depending on the types of outreaches that you're collecting and what you need for those data wise. Keep in mind, you can also use the logic here, just like we talked about for intake. So I might have just one add new outreach process, but if I say that it's a training, I might have new fields that pop up to enter things like the instructors. So again, the actual process for creating an outreach record, just like creating a case, is completely customizable. Just like we talked about before, you can create custom fields here for outreaches as well. So again, really whatever you would want to collect about an outreach record, you can build in here. And then outreaches will work very similar to cases as well when it comes to managing them. So we have our list of outreach records, we can click into them. We've got our outreach profile, just like we talked about with the case profile. This will be customizable. So you'll make sure the data you're collecting is here and it's organized how you see fit. And then, of course, our actions menu, just like with a case, is all of the various things we can do with an outreach record. So we can add brochures, which is a way to record what types of materials we might have given out, like a Know Your Rights brochure. Of course, we can add contacts to an outreach. So especially useful if we are partnering with someone on this event and we want to tag those folks. Of course, we can add notes and documents and time to an outreach, just like with cases. We can also associate cases to outreaches. So let's say that we have a community event and a bunch of people come, and 4 people end up having cases created with us because they came. We can make that association, or again, for any reason that it makes sense to. Of course, you can edit the outreach after you've entered it. You can copy them if you have similar ones to create, and also use the calendar records that we talked about earlier. Events, tasks, and deadlines can also be added to these outreach records as well. We talked a bit about our grant management earlier. We took a peek at those grant filters that were showing up at the end of our intake process. But of course, we also have a full grants management module. So this is where you can create and track your funding streams. Those funding codes would be available to assign to cases, outreaches, or time slips. And of course, for each funding code, you can designate if they should be available in all 3 places or not. And of course, like we talked about earlier, you can also put on those filters. So you could say, yes, they're available for cases, but only if the client is a veteran, or only if the legal problem code is one of these 4, or again, whatever parameters should be there. One more thing to mention is that you can also track spend down based on time slips. So this is completely optional, but if you'd like to, you can deposit funds into the grant. And then again, see that fund activity spend down based on time slips entered against it. So here I see we deposited 5,000 and we have spent down a couple hundred through these time slips here. And the way that you spend down can be just a flat rate hourly. So it could be for every hour entered against this grant, we deduct $100. It can also be variable. So that's what this one is technically set to. All of my rates were 100 anyway, but this is saying it's going to look at the user's rate. So if my rate were $50 per hour, it would charge that for the time that I've entered against this grant. And then the last option is that you can have it just set for a flat unit rate per case. So the first time slip I enter on a case under this funding code might deduct $500, regardless of the number of hours. And then after that, every time slip entered on that case under the funding code is not going to deduct anything. So it's just that one time $500 or whatever that fee would be. You can also set up things like alerts here, so you can get an alert once the fund has dropped below a certain threshold. So let's go ahead and finish off today's demo by talking a little bit about reports in LegalServer. The first thing I like to always say about reports here is that as long as you're entering the data into LegalServer, you're going to be able to build a report on that data. So of course, all of our case data, including any custom fields that we decide to build, but also you can build reports on timekeeping information. What are we spending our time on? How much time have we spent on this type of case and this type of activity last quarter? The calendar, of course, is reportable. We can see how many different types of hearings did we have on that type of case last year. So again, as long as you're entering the data into the system, you're going to be able to build those reports off of it. Keep in mind there are two main permissions related to reports. So can the user run reports, which means they can use reports that have already been built, update the filters and things, which we'll see in a second, and see the data and extract the data. The other set of permissions is tied to building entirely new reports and editing your existing reports. So those folks with that extra permission would be able to build new things. They can import reports. We have a whole list of reports on our help site that you can import right in. You don't have to build from scratch. And then, of course, also they can edit your existing reports to, add new things to them or just adjust them as needed in the future. We're going to take a look at the running side. So what we're going to do is just click on one of our reports here. We'll start with our cases basic report. And when we run this report, we're going to see the data based on the default filtering. So whoever built this report decided we should see open cases from these couple of problem codes that were opened last year. And keep in mind, every report can have different default filters. So we might have something called open case report where the only filter is disposition is open. We want to see every single open case. And then you might have something like a funder-based report that has 10 different default filters because we're looking for a really specific set of cases. Also, as the person running the report, I'm able to adjust those filters. So let's scroll down first. We can see a couple of additional display formats, and then we see we've got 31 cases that match that filtering. But if I go back up to the top, I can adjust those filters. So I could say I'm actually looking for open cases of any problem code. So we're going to kind of just erase that filter. And maybe I don't want to see cases opened last year. I want to see the ones we've opened so far this year. And keep in mind, every date filter will have these smart filters available. Smart because they're based on the day you run the report. So current year, of course, right now is 2026. It felt like yesterday, but a couple of months ago, that was pulling in 2025 values automatically. Then we just scroll down, click Run Report to apply those changes. And now we've got only 6 cases that match our new filtering. You probably noticed that I had some other filters in the list available. So again, whoever built the report decided what is here, what's available for me to filter on if I want to. And as the report runner, I get to pick and choose which of these to apply. I can also change the data that I'm seeing about those cases. So again, whoever built it decided we should see these things by default, but these are also part of the report and available to see if I want to. So maybe I do want to see some of these demographic fields. I'll move them over to the display side. And maybe I don't care about the agent intake. I'm going to move that off of the display side. We can also change the order of the columns here if we want to. And then click Run Report and see just the data that I am interested in seeing. We can get some totaling at the bottom so we can really easily see some breakdowns for numerical fields, total or average. And of course, any additional display formats can be set up on each report as well. So pie charts, bar charts, stacked bar charts, cross tabs, etc. We, of course, can save this information. So we can export to CSV or Excel. You can also enable the option to download as a PDF or print out the results. And not only can I save the data as it is at this very moment, but I can also save the structure of the report that we've just updated. So if I made a bunch of changes to the filters and the data options, and I also could have sorted the report how I wanted, we can save that by clicking Save Report, giving it a new name, and it creates a copy of this report with my changes as the new defaults. So basically my version of this report. So next time I need to run it, I could save future me all of that clicking by just heading over to my Saved Reports tab and running my version. Last thing to highlight about reports here today is that you can also schedule them. So if you have a report that you know that you need on a regular basis, it might be monthly, it might be weekly, it might be quarterly, you would build that report, set up your schedule, So I might want to get it on the first of every month. Maybe it's all of the cases we closed last month. Or maybe it's all of the intakes we did this week and I want to get that Friday afternoon. So again, whatever schedule makes sense. And then you would just build the email and who it should go to. And on that day and time, LegalServer would run the report, download it as an Excel file, and email it to whoever you have indicated here. So again, just super handy for those things you know you need on a regular basis. Don't have to remember to log in and find the report and run it. It's just going to be sitting in your inbox for you. All right, so that was some highlights of reports here in LegalServer, which is where we will end our demo here for today. Thank you so much for watching.